I was standing in my apartment doorway at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday when my mother appeared with my younger brother Kyle. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. She held her phone up, showing my LinkedIn profile with my senior software engineer title clearly visible. Before I could even say hello, she announced she knew I made at least $200,000 a year and declared she needed $50,000 immediately because family takes care of family. Kyle stood behind her, smirking, holding shopping bags from expensive stores I couldn't afford when I was his age. I stepped aside and let them in, which looking back was my first mistake. But years of conditioning don't disappear overnight, and some part of me still responded to my mother's presence with automatic obedience. Diana swept into my living room like she owned the place, her eyes scanning everything with an evaluating gaze that made my skin crawl. Kyle followed, immediately dropping onto my couch and putting his feet up on my coffee table. The memories came flooding back as I watched them settle in. Growing up in our middle-class home in Columbus, Ohio, it'd always been the invisible child. Diana had made it crystal clear from my earliest memories that Kyle was special, that he deserved the best, that he was destined for great things. Kyle got new clothes every school year while I wore hand-me-downs from cousins. He got the latest PlayStation and Xbox systems the day they released while I saved up birthday money for a used Game Boy. When he turned 16, Diana bought him a car. When I turned 16, she told me I should be grateful I had legs to walk. My father left when I was 12 years old. I remember that day with painful clarity because Diana sat me down afterward and told me it was partially my fault. She said I was too needy, too demanding of attention, and that I'd driven him away with my constant requirements. Kyle, she said, had been the easy child, the one who brought joy. I carried that guilt for years, believing I'd destroyed our family. Kyle was the golden child who could do absolutely nothing wrong. When he failed classes, Diana blamed the teachers for not understanding his learning style. When he wrecked his first car drunk driving at 17, Diana blamed the friend who'd been with him. When he stole money from her purse, she convinced herself she'd miscounted. The sun rose and set on Kyle's existence, and I was just the shadow nobody wanted. I worked 2 jobs through high school, one at a grocery store and one mowing lawns in the summer. I saved every penny because I knew college was my only way out, and I knew Diana wouldn't help me. Kyle partied his way through high school with a 2.1 grade point average, but Diana was convinced he'd figure it out eventually. She spent thousands sending him to a state university where he lasted exactly 1 semester before dropping out to pursue what he called his true calling, day trading stocks with money he didn't have. I put myself through community college first, living in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates and eating ramen most nights. I earned my associate degree with a 4.0 average, then transferred to Ohio State University on a combination of scholarships, grants, and student loans I'd be paying off for the next decade. I studied computer science, worked as a teaching assistant, and graduated with honors. I was proud of myself even if nobody else was. When I graduated and landed my first job as a junior developer making $55,000 a year, I thought I'd finally made it. Then Diana called. It was the first time I'd heard from her in months. She didn't ask how I was doing or congratulate me on graduating. She asked for $15,000 to cover Kyle's credit card debt. Had maxed out 3 cards buying crypto that tanked and funding a lifestyle he couldn't afford. She said it was my responsibility as the older brother to help family. I said no. It was the hardest word I'd ever spoken to her, but I said it. I had my own student loans, my own bills, my own life to build. Diana called me selfish. She said I'd always been self-centered, even as a child. She said I was proving my father right for leaving, that I was cold and unfeeling just like him. Then she hung up and didn't speak to me again. That was 6 years ago. Now here she sat on my couch in my apartment in Denver, Colorado, where I'd moved 3 years ago for a better job opportunity. She'd found me somehow, tracked me down through social media or mutual connections, and decided it was time to cash in on my success. Diana folded her hands in her lap with that practiced expression of maternal concern I remembered so well. Kyle pulled out his phone and started scrolling, not even pretending to care about the conversation he was part of. She told me about Kyle's latest opportunity. Had found an online crypto trading course that promised to teach advanced strategies for making 6 figures in passive income. The course cost $50,000, but it was an investment in his future. She said Kyle had always been entrepreneurial, always had a mind for business, and this was finally his chance to prove himself. All he needed was a little help from his successful older brother. I stood there holding my apartment door open, torn between disbelief and old familiar guilt. Diana kept talking. She said I owed the family for raising me, for keeping a roof over my head, for feeding me. She conveniently forgot about the times I went to school hungry because Shed spent the grocery money on new shoes for Kyle. She forgot about the birthdays she missed because she was at Kyle's football games, even though he spent most of them on the bench. She forgot about telling me I was a burden she couldn't wait to be rid of. Kyle finally looked up from his phone. He gave me that same smirk Head perfected in high school, the one that said he knew He'd get whatever he wanted. He always had. Why would now be any different? Then Diana dropped the real bomb. Her voice shifted, becoming smaller, more vulnerable. She told me Shed remortgaged her house to pay for Kyle's previous business ventures. There had been the protein shake multi-level marketing scheme that lost $12,000. The pressure washing business that never got off the ground despite her buying $8,000 worth of equipment. The cryptocurrency mining operation that cost $25,000 in specialized computers that now sat useless in her garage. She was 3 months behind on her mortgage payments. The bank was threatening foreclosure. She was about to lose her house, the home where I'd grown up, the only stability she had left. And instead of asking for help humbly, instead of acknowledging the years of favoritism and neglect and emotional abuse, she sat there demanding money as my duty. Her eyes weren't sad or apologetic, they were entitled. She genuinely believed I owed her this, that my success was somehow her creation, that she had any right to what I'd built entirely on my own. Diana launched into a full assault on my emotions with the precision of someone who'd been manipulating people for decades. She reminded me of every small thing Shed ever done for me as a child. She brought up the time she drove me to the emergency room when I broke my arm falling off my bike, conveniently forgetting that Shed screamed at me the entire drive for being careless and costing her money. She mentioned buying me school supplies every year, leaving out the part where I got the cheapest notebooks while Kyle got designer backpacks. She talked about the sacrifices she made as a single mother, painting herself as a martyr who'd given up her own dreams to raise 2 boys alone. She said she could have pursued her own career, could have found another husband, could have had the life she wanted, but she chose us instead. She chose to be our mother, and now when she needed help, her own son was turning his back on her. Kyle joined in right on cue, like they'd rehearsed this performance. He called me a sellout, who'd forgotten where I came from. He said I'd moved to Colorado and left them behind without a second thought, that I'd gotten too big for my roots, that I thought I was better than them now. He said a real man takes care of his family, and clearly I wasn't a real man. I felt it happening despite knowing better. The old programming kicked in, that deep childhood conditioning that said I was responsible for my mother's happiness, that I had to earn love through compliance, that saying no made me a bad person. I thought about my savings account. It'd been disciplined for years, living below my means, putting away money for a down payment on a house. I had about $90,000 saved. $50,000 would hurt, would set me back years, but I could technically do it. I looked at my mother's face and saw the calculation there, the certainty that Shed win like she always won. And for just a moment, I considered giving in, not because I wanted to, but because the exhaustion of fighting her felt overwhelming. Then Diana made her critical mistake. She stood up and started walking around my apartment, and her expression shifted from vulnerable mother to critical judge. She looked at my couch and said it was too expensive, that I didn't need genuine leather when fabric would do. She commented on my television, saying it was wasteful to have such a large screen when a smaller one would work fine. She picked up the decorative bowl Sarah had bought me and examined it like she was pricing it for a yard sale. She told me I was living beyond my needs while my own mother suffered. She said I was selfish for having nice things when I could be helping family. Every item in my home became evidence of my moral failure in her narrative. Then she picked up the framed photo on my bookshelf, the one of me and Sarah at her cousin's wedding last summer. Sarah looked beautiful in her blue dress, and I was grinning like an idiot because I was so happy. Diana looked at the photo and her lip curled. She said something about how Sarah probably liked my money, how women can smell financial success, How I shouldn't get too comfortable because girls like that leave when someone richer comes along. She put the photo face down on the shelf like it offended her. That comment about Sarah cut through the guilt fog like a knife. Sarah was a pediatric nurse who worked 12-hour shifts taking care of sick children. She made about $65,000 a year and had her own student loans from nursing school. Shed never once asked me for money or expected me to pay for everything. She insisted we split costs fairly, and Shed been the one to encourage me to save aggressively for my future. Diana didn't know anything about Sarah, but she was perfectly willing to insult her to maintain control over me. Kyle, emboldened by Diana's attitude and my silence, got up from the couch and started walking around like he was shopping. He picked up my laptop from the dining table, a high-end MacBook Pro I needed for work and had saved months to buy. He whistled and said it was a nice setup, that maybe he'd take it as a down payment on what I owed them. He was joking, but he wasn't. That's what made it so disturbing. There was an edge of seriousness under the laugh, a testing of boundaries to see what he could get away with. Then Kyle walked down my hallway without asking and opened my bedroom door. He looked inside and called out comments about my television, my clothes hanging in the visible closet, my dresser. He treated my private space like a store he was browsing. Diana didn't stop him. She didn't tell him to respect my privacy or stay out of rooms he hadn't been invited into. Instead, she smiled and nodded and said Kyle was right, that I had more than enough to share. That's when I understood with complete clarity what was really happening. This wasn't a one-time emergency request. This wasn't even about the $50,000. This was a test to see if they could access my resources whenever they wanted. If I gave them money now, they'd be back in 3 months with another crisis, another opportunity, another demand. They were already treating my home like their personal shopping mall, itemizing my possessions, calculating what they could take. Diana didn't see me as her son. She saw me as an ATM with an unfortunate password requirement that involved her pretending to care. Kyle didn't see me as his brother. He saw me as the resource that had been withheld from him his whole life, and now he wanted his share plus interest. I thought about what my life would look like if I said yes. The endless phone calls asking for more, the guilt trips every time I bought something for myself, the expectation that my income belonged to the family, which really meant belonged to Kyle. I thought about bringing Sarah into this dysfunction, about asking her to accept that my money would constantly drain toward my mother's bottomless needs and my brother's failed schemes, and I realized I couldn't do it, not even to make them leave, not even to buy temporary peace, because there would be no peace, just increasingly expensive installments of the same manipulation. I told them no. The word came out firm and clear, surprising even me with its strength. I said I'd worked hard for everything I had, that I owed them nothing, and that they needed to leave my apartment. Diana's face transformed in an instant. The vulnerable mother mask dropped away completely, revealing something cold and furious underneath. Her eyes narrowed and her mouth twisted into something ugly. She called me an ungrateful disappointment, said she wished Shed never had me, that I'd been nothing but a burden from the day I was born. She told me my father left because I was such a difficult child, so needy and demanding and exhausting. She said Shed tried her best with me, but some people are just born selfish and there's nothing a mother can do about it. She said I'd regret this, that I'd come crawling back someday when I needed her and Shed remember how I'd treated her in her hour of need. The words were designed to hurt, and they did. Even knowing she was lashing out, even understanding the manipulation, hearing your mother say she wished you'd never been born cuts deep into places that never fully heal. Kyle stood up from the couch and moved closer to me. He was 3 inches taller than my 5 feet 10 inches and probably 40 pounds heavier. Head always been bigger, and Head learned young that his size intimidated me. He stepped into my space, close enough that I had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. He said I was really going to let my own mother lose her house. He asked, "What kind of man does that? What kind of brother abandons his family? What kind of son turns his back on the woman who raised him?" His voice was low and threatening, his body language aggressive. He was trying to physically intimidate me into compliance. And the worst part was that it almost worked. Old fears from childhood rose up, memories of times Head shoved me or held me down or taken things from me while Diana watched and did nothing. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I was 28 years old. I paid my own bills, and this was my home. I told him to step back. My voice shook a little, but I said it. Kyle just smiled and stayed exactly where he was. I pulled out my phone and said, "I'd call the police if they didn't leave." Diana laughed, actually laughed, and told me to go ahead. She said I should call them and explain that I was throwing my own mother out on the street. She said I should tell them I was refusing to help her in her time of need. She asked how that would look, how my neighbors would react, how my girlfriend would feel knowing what kind of person I really was. She was betting that shame would control me, that I'd be too embarrassed to involve authorities, that I'd back down rather than make a scene. And for a few seconds, I hesitated. The thought of police coming to my apartment building, of neighbors hearing the commotion, of having to explain this mess to strangers, made me want to just give them something to make them leave. While Diana was ranting about how cruel and heartless I was, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Kyle had moved to my kitchen counter where I kept my keys in a small bowl by the coffee maker. I watched him palm something and slide it into his pocket, smooth and practiced like he'd done it 1,000 times before. My spare keys, the set I kept for emergencies, for when I locked myself out or needed someone to water my plants when I traveled. Kyle had spotted them earlier while Diana was talking, and had just stolen them right in front of me. I said his name sharply. He turned with that smirk still in place, playing innocent. I told him to give me back my keys. He asked what keys, spreading his hands like he had no idea what I was talking about. Diana told me I was being paranoid, that I was looking for excuses to paint them as villains. I walked up to Kyle and held out my hand. He stared at me for a long moment, something calculating in his eyes, then slowly pulled my keys from his pocket. But instead of handing them over, he dangled them in the air between us and said this was insurance. He said in case I changed my mind and decided to lock them out before they were done talking, they needed a way to continue the conversation. The threat was clear and undeniable. They were letting me know they could come back anytime they wanted, that my locks wouldn't keep them out, that my home wasn't really mine as long as they had access. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was a violation of my safety, my security, my fundamental right to control who entered my space. Diana didn't tell Kyle to give the keys back. She didn't express shock at his behavior or apologize for the threat. She just watched with this satisfied expression, like Kyle was doing exactly what she wanted him to do. I realized with sickening clarity that they'd probably done this before. Not to me, but to someone. This felt practiced, coordinated, like a routine they'd perfected. I wondered how many other relatives or friends they'd cornered like this. How many people had given them money just to make them go away. I snatched the keys from Kyle's hand fast enough that he didn't have time to pull them back. He looked surprised, then angry. He took a step toward me and I stepped back, holding my phone up and telling him I was calling the police right now if he touched me. Something in my voice or my face must have convinced him I meant it, because he stopped. Diana started talking again, her tone shifting to hurt and bewildered, asking why I was being so dramatic, saying they just wanted to talk like family. But I was done talking. I was done listening. I was done being in the same room as them. I grabbed my laptop, my wallet, my work bag, and my car keys. I told them I was leaving to stay somewhere else and they needed to be gone by morning or I would absolutely call the police and report them for trespassing. Diana called after me as I walked toward my door, her voice rising to a near shout. She said I'd regret this, that I was making a huge mistake, that she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of son I really was. Kyle said something crude about me being controlled by my girlfriend, making assumptions about Sarah that made my blood boil. I left without responding. I walked out of my own apartment, got in my car, and drove to Sarah's place across town, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The violation of having them in my space, touching my things, stealing my keys, threatening me in my own home felt overwhelming. I'd stood up to them, but it felt less like a victory and more like I'd barely escaped something dangerous. Sarah answered her door in scrubs, just home from a long shift at the hospital. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside. Her apartment was small and comfortable, filled with plants and photos and the kind of warmth my place never quite achieved. I collapsed onto her couch and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to anger to outright fury on my behalf. When I finished, She said I needed to protect myself legally. She pulled out her laptop and started researching tenant rights and trespassing laws in Colorado. She made me promise to call a locksmith first thing in the morning and to document everything that had happened. Sarah was practical like that. She didn't just offer emotional support. She offered actionable solutions. It was one of the many things I loved about her. She saw problems as things to be solved, not drama to be endured. I tried to sleep on her couch that night, but couldn't. My mind kept spinning, replaying Diana's words, seeing Kyle's threatening posture, feeling the violation of them going through my things. Around midnight, I gave up and just lay there staring at Sarah's ceiling, listening to the sounds of her neighbors through the thin walls. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it, expecting maybe a message from work or spam. Instead, it was a Venmo request from Kyle. $50,000. The note said, "Family first." The absolute audacity of it left me speechless. Had just threatened me, stolen from me, and now he was making a payment request like I was a vending machine that just needed the right code. I stared at my phone in disbelief, anger rising in my chest like a physical force. Then another notification came through. My credit card alert. Someone had attempted to use my credit card for a purchase of $3,200 at an electronics store in Denver. The transaction was declined because I had purchase alerts set up and blocks on unusual or large purchases without my explicit approval. My stomach dropped. I pulled up my credit card app with shaking hands and saw the declined transaction details. The store was one of those high-end places that sold expensive computers and camera equipment. Someone had tried to buy thousands of dollars worth of equipment on my card. I immediately knew it was Kyle. But how did he have my credit card information? I was paranoid about online security. I never wrote down my card numbers. I used complex passwords and two-factor authentication on everything. Then I remembered something. When Id first moved to Denver 3 years ago, Id had mail forwarding set up from my old address. But for the first month, some mail had still gone to the old place and the landlord had forwarded it to me in a bundle. In that pile had been a credit card statement from a card I barely used anymore. Id meant to shred it but had gotten busy with work and just stuck it in a drawer in my kitchen to deal with later. That drawer, the one Kyle had been standing next to when I was arguing with Diana. I launched myself off Sarah's couch and opened my laptop. I accessed my apartment security camera, the basic one Id installed by my front door, to watch for package deliveries. The camera had a wide enough angle that it caught part of my kitchen. I scrolled back through the footage to earlier that evening. There, while Diana had been talking, holding my attention in the living room, Kyle had drifted into the kitchen. The footage showed him opening drawers, rifling through them quickly but methodically. He found the drawer with my old mail and paperwork. He pulled out the credit card statement, held it up to read it, then took out his phone and photographed it. The whole thing took maybe 45 seconds. Had stolen my credit card information right there in my apartment while his mother kept me distracted. They'd planned this. They'd coordinated it. This wasn't desperate people making bad choices in the moment. This was calculated theft. I felt sick. My own mother and brother had come to my home not just to manipulate me, but to actively steal from me. They'd planned to take whatever they could get, whether I gave it willingly or they had to take it by force or fraud. Sarah appeared in her bedroom doorway, awakened by my movement. I showed her the security footage and the declined transaction. Her face went pale, then hard. She said we were calling the police right now. I hesitated, still programmed by years of family loyalty conditioning. She said it again, firmer. These people broke into my private documents and stole financial information. That was identity theft. That was a crime. But I couldn't quite make that call. Not yet. Instead, I called my bank's 24-hour fraud line. I spent an hour on the phone, explaining the situation, freezing all my cards, setting up new fraud alerts, initiating new cards to be sent. The representative was sympathetic and efficient. She said I'd done the right thing, calling immediately, and that the declined transaction meant no money was actually stolen. Next, I called the locksmith I'd looked up earlier and left a voicemail asking for an emergency appointment first thing in the morning. I didn't care what it cost. I needed my locks changed before Diana and Kyle could use those spare keys I'd taken back, because who knew if Kyle had made copies? Then I changed all my online passwords, enabled additional security features on all my accounts, and set up alerts on everything. By the time I finished, the sun was starting to rise and Sarah was making coffee, moving quietly in her kitchen while I sat on her couch, surrounded by the wreckage of my sense of safety. She brought me coffee and sat beside me. She didn't say "I told you so" or ask why Id let them in the first place. She just put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Wed, fix this together." That simple gesture of solidarity made something tight in my chest loosen just a little. At 7 in the morning, I returned to my apartment with Sarah beside me and a locksmith following in his van. Id called ahead and Head agreed to come immediately for an emergency fee. I didn't even ask about. I didn't care about the cost. I needed my home secure. Diana and Kyle were still there. They'd slept on my couch, and the evidence was everywhere. My throw blankets were on the floor, my couch cushions were askew, and my kitchen was a disaster. They'd eaten my food, leaving empty containers and dirty dishes everywhere. Kyle was asleep on the couch still, his shoes on my furniture. Diana was awake, sitting in my armchair, drinking my coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in and had the audacity to smile like this was a pleasant morning visit. She started to say something about hoping Id come to my senses overnight, but I cut her off. I told her the locksmith was here to change my locks and she and Kyle had 10 minutes to gather their things and leave. Diana's smile disappeared. She stood up and said I couldn't do that this was her son's home and she had a right to be here. I pointed out that her name wasn't on any lease or deed, that she had been asked to leave last night and had refused, and that she was now trespassing. The legal research Sarah had done was coming in handy. Diana threatened to call the police herself. She said she'd report me for illegally evicting her, for elder abuse, for abandonment. I pulled out my phone calmly and opened the security camera footage. I turned the screen so she could see Kyle photographing my credit card statement. Her face went white. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely scared. I told her very clearly that she had two choices. They could leave right now voluntarily and I wouldn't press charges for identity theft and trespassing, or they could refuse to leave, and I'd call the police immediately to report attempted fraud and trespassing with the video evidence to prove it. Kyle woke up during this, groggy and confused. When he realized what was happening, he tried to bluster. He said I was being ridiculous, that he was just looking around, that I couldn't prove anything. Sarah, who'd been quietly recording everything on her phone since we walked in, held up her phone and said she had video and audio of this entire conversation, that she was a witness to everything, and that she'd testify if needed. The fight went out of Kyle fast. He looked at Diana, waiting for her to fix this like she'd always fixed things for him. But Diana had no moves left. Her manipulations only worked when she had leverage, and I'd taken away all her leverage by being willing to involve authorities. The locksmith, who'd been waiting politely by the door through all this, cleared his throat and said he'd step outside for a moment. I appreciated his discretion. This was humiliating enough without an audience. Diana and Kyle gathered their things slowly, Diana muttering under her breath about ungrateful children and cruel sons. Kyle shot me looks that were pure hatred. As they walked toward the door, Diana stopped and turned to face me one last time. She told me my father didn't leave because of her. She said he left because I reminded him too much of his own father, my grandfather, who I'd never met because Head died before I was born. She said my grandfather was cold and selfish, cared more about money than people, died alone with nobody at his funeral. She said I was just like him, that I'd end up exactly the same way, dying alone in some sterile apartment with nothing but my bank account to keep me company. The words were designed to wound, to plant seeds of doubt that would grow in my mind over time, and they worked. Even knowing she was lashing out, even understanding this was her final attempt at control, it hurt. The idea that I was fundamentally broken, fundamentally unlovable, that isolation was my destiny, hit something deep and vulnerable inside me. Sarah squeezed my hand hard, grounding me. Diana and Kyle left, Diana's final words hanging in the air like poison. The locksmith came back in and spent the next hour changing all my locks, installing deadbolts, making my home secure again. I cleaned my apartment, scrubbing away the evidence of their presence, throwing out the food they'd contaminated with their touch. That night, Sarah stayed over. We didn't talk much. She just existed in my space, her presence a reminder that Diana was wrong, that I wasn't alone, that I was capable of building relationships with people who valued me. 3 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A man's voice said hello, tentative and uncertain. He said my name like a question. Then he said something that made my world tilt. "This is your father, Marcus. We need to talk." I met Marcus at a coffee shop in downtown Denver 4 days later. I picked a public place, somewhere I could leave easily if I needed to. Sarah offered to come with me, but I needed to do this alone. Some conversations you have to face by yourself. I arrived 15 minutes early and ordered a coffee I didn't drink, just held it for something to do with my hands. When Marcus walked in, I recognized him immediately, even though 16 years had passed. He was 52 now, his hair gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he left. He looked tired and worn, but also somehow lighter than I remembered, like head put down something heavy and was still adjusting to the absence of weight. He saw me, and his face did something complicated, emotions flickering across it too fast to identify. He walked over slowly and asked if he could sit. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Marcus sat down across from me and immediately apologized. Not a vague apology, not an excuse-laden explanation, but a clear and direct, "I'm sorry for abandoning you. I'm sorry for leaving you alone with her. I'm sorry for not fighting harder to be in your life. I'm sorry for being a coward." The words hit me harder than I expected. It imagined this conversation 1,000 times over the years, and in most versions, I was angry, accusatory, cold. But sitting there with this man who looked broken and remorseful, I just felt exhausted. I asked him why Head called. Why now, after 16 years of silence? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a Facebook post from Diana. She had written a long, dramatic screed about her ungrateful son, who'd refused to help his dying mother in her time of need. She called me heartless and cruel, said I'd turned my back on the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise me. The post had dozens of comments from relatives and old family friends, most expressing shock and disappointment in me. Marcus said He'd seen the post and immediately knew it was a lie. He said he knew Diana well enough to recognize her manipulations, that her calling herself dying when she was perfectly healthy was classic her. He said He'd tried to reach out to me over the years, but Diana had blocked his attempts. He wanted me to know the truth before Diana's lies poisoned more of my life. I asked him what truth. What could possibly make 16 years of abandonment make sense? Marcus took a breath and started talking. He told me about his marriage to Diana, how she'd been charming and attentive when they were dating, but changed after they married. She became controlling, manipulative, always needing to be right, always twisting situations to make herself the victim. When Kyle was born, something shifted in her completely. She became obsessed with making Kyle perfect, with ensuring he had everything, with positioning him as special and superior, and I became the scapegoat. Every problem in Diana's life became my fault somehow. If she was tired, it was because I was demanding. If money was tight, it was because I ate too much, or needed clothes, or cost her in some unnamed way. Marcus said he tried to protect me, tried to balance Diana's favoritism, but she fought him on everything. She accused him of not loving Kyle enough, of trying to hold Kyle back, of being jealous of his own son. The fights got worse. Diana started making threats. She said if Marcus didn't support her parenting decisions, she'd leave and take both of us kids and make sure Marcus never saw us again. She said she'd tell everyone he was abusive, that courts always side with mothers, that He'd lose everything if he pushed her. Marcus stayed for years trying to make it work, trying to shield me from the worst of Diana's treatment. But eventually, Diana gave him an ultimatum. She sat him down one night after he'd gone to bed and told him he had to choose. Either he supported her favoritism completely, backed up her treatment of me without question, watched her scapegoat me and said nothing, or he left. Those were his only options. Marcus chose to leave. He said it was the coward's choice, that he should have fought for custody, should have documented everything and taken us both away from her. But he was exhausted and beaten down and convinced by her threats that He'd lose anyway. So he left, thinking at least he wouldn't have to watch me suffer daily. He paid child support for both of us until we turned 18. He sent money every month, on time, the full amount. But Diana told me the money was only for Kyle. That Marcus had specified in the divorce he'd only pay for his favorite child. Another lie. Marcus showed me the divorce decree on his phone, showing clearly that child support was designated for both children equally. Marcus said he tried to reach out to me multiple times over the years. He sent emails that bounced back. He sent letters that were returned unopened. He called the house and Diana said I didn't want to talk to him. After I turned 18, he tried to find me on social media, but I had everything locked down because I didn't want Diana finding me. He'd respected what he thought was my wish to be left alone, not knowing that Diana had been intercepting and blocking everything. Then 8 years ago, Marcus said he hit rock bottom with alcohol and checked himself into rehab. He got sober, stayed sober, and started therapy to work through his guilt and his failures as a father. He said therapy helped him understand he couldn't change the past, but he could try to be better going forward, even if that meant simply being available if I ever wanted contact. Marcus told me he was proud of me. He said he'd found my LinkedIn 2 years ago and had been following my career from a distance, watching me build a life despite everything. He said he'd become a good man not because of Diana or him, but in spite of them both. Sitting there listening to him, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't forgive him instantly for leaving. 16 years doesn't disappear in one conversation. But I understood him better. I saw him as a flawed person who'd made bad choices from a place of fear and exhaustion, rather than as the monster Diana had painted him as. Then Marcus told me something that changed everything. He said Diana wasn't actually broke. She wasn't losing her house. She wasn't in financial trouble at all. She had a settlement from a car accident 5 years ago, about $150,000, sitting in an investment account. Shed sold her house last year and downsized to a condo that was paid off entirely. She was financially stable, possibly more stable than she'd been in years. I stared at him, processing this. Everything Diana had said was a lie. The mortgage, the foreclosure, the desperation, all of it fabricated. Kyle's business opportunity was probably fake too, just a cover story for them trying to extract money from me. Marcus said he knew all this because Kyle had called him drunk 6 months ago. Kyle apparently called Marcus occasionally, usually when he wanted something or when Diana put him up to it. This time, Kyle was drunk and angry about something and started ranting. He bragged about how they were going to track me down and make me pay for abandoning the family. He talked about my LinkedIn, about how they'd found out I was doing well financially, about how Diana said it was time for me to contribute. Kyle said they were going to play up the broke mother angle and guilt me into paying up. Marcus had been horrified. He tried to warn Kyle that this was a terrible idea, that I didn't owe them anything. But Kyle just laughed and hung up. Marcus didn't have any way to contact me to warn me, so Head just hoped it wouldn't happen. When he saw Diana's Facebook post, he knew it had. Sitting there in that coffee shop, I realized the entire visit had been a premeditated con. They'd researched me, tracked me down, created a fictional crisis, and come to my home specifically to exploit me. It wasn't desperation or poor judgment. It was calculated manipulation with my mother as the architect and my brother as the accomplice. Marcus asked if I was okay. I told him honestly that I didn't know. I asked him why he was telling me all this now, what he wanted from me. He said he didn't want anything except maybe a chance to know me as an adult, to build something from the ruins if I was willing. He said I didn't owe him that chance, but he was asking anyway. We sat there for another hour. He told me about his life now, his job as an accountant, his small apartment, his sponsor from his recovery program. I told him about my work, about Sarah, about building a life in Denver. It was awkward and tentative and painful in places, but it was also real in a way nothing with Diana had ever been. When we finally left, Marcus asked if we could meet again. I said maybe, that I needed time to process everything. He nodded and said he understood, that He'd wait as long as I needed. As we walked to our cars, he stopped and said one more thing. He said I wasn't like my grandfather. He said I was kind and hardworking and capable of building real relationships, and that Diana's final curse was just her trying to plant doubt because she'd lost control. He said I should remember that. I drove back to my apartment feeling like it'd been taken apart and reassembled slightly differently. Everything I'd believed about my childhood, about why my father left, about Diana's struggles, all of it was either a lie or a distortion. The foundation it built my identity on was crumbling, and I wasn't sure yet what would be underneath. The next few months unfolded like I was learning to walk in a new body. Marcus and I started meeting weekly for coffee. It was awkward at first, both of us carrying so much unspoken history. But slowly, we found a rhythm. We talked about surface things mostly, work and hobbies and safe topics, but occasionally Wed ventured deeper. He told me more about his marriage to Diana, and I told him about growing up as the scapegoat child. We started attending therapy together, family sessions designed to help us work through the past without getting stuck in it. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not at first. It was more like understanding. I understood why Head left, even though I still wished Head fought harder. He understood how deeply his absence had hurt me, even though he couldn't change it. We were two broken people trying to figure out if we could build something new from the pieces. I blocked Diana and Kyle on every platform I could think of. Phone, email, social media, everything. I wanted 0 access points for their manipulation. But Diana didn't give up easily. She started trying to contact me through other family members. My Aunt Carol called me 3 weeks after the confrontation. She said Diana had been talking to everyone, claiming Id cruelly abandoned her, spinning elaborate stories about how Id changed and become cold. Aunt Carol asked gently for my side of the story. I told her everything. I sent her the security camera footage of Kyle stealing my credit card information. I explained the lies about the house and the foreclosure. I laid out the years of favoritism and emotional abuse with specific examples. Aunt Carol listened to all of it and then was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said she believed me, that Shed always sensed something was off in how Diana treated me versus Kyle, but Shed told herself it wasn't her place to intervene. She apologized for not speaking up sooner. Word spread through the family. Some relatives reached out to apologize for believing Diana's lies. Some reached out just to check if I was okay. A few sided with Diana no matter what, believing her victim narrative over any evidence. I let those relationships go without fighting for them. Id learned that people who want to believe lies will find a way, and I couldn't control that. Diana tried one final manipulation. She showed up at my workplace on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a meeting when security called up saying my mother was in the lobby demanding to see me. My boss, a woman named Angela who'd become a mentor to me, saw my face go pale. She quietly told me to take whatever time I needed. I went down to the lobby. Diana was there in the middle of the space, making a scene. She was crying loudly, telling anyone who'd listen that her son worked here and had abandoned her, that she just wanted to talk to him, that she was a poor old woman with nowhere else to turn. People were staring. The security guard looked uncomfortable but professional. I walked up calmly and told Diana she needed to leave. She turned her tears on me, reaching out like she wanted to hug me, calling me her baby boy. I stepped back and repeated that she needed to leave, or I'd have security remove her. She tried to make it look like I was being violent or aggressive, gasping and stepping back like I'd pushed her even though I hadn't touched her. The security guard had seen enough. Head watched me walk up normally and stand still. He told Diana she needed to leave the building immediately, or Head call the police for trespassing. Diana switched tactics fast, dropping the tears and going cold. She told me I'd regret this, that karma would catch up to me, that I'd suffer for how I'd treated her. I didn't respond. I just stood there quietly until she finally left. The security guard apologized to me. I thanked him and went back upstairs, expecting to find people whispering and judging. Instead, Angela called me into her office. I prepared myself for a lecture about keeping personal drama away from work. Instead, Angela told me Shed seen the whole thing on the security camera feed. She said Id handled it with remarkable composure. Then she shared her own story of cutting off her toxic father 10 years earlier, about the guilt and grief and eventual peace that came from that decision. She said setting boundaries with family doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a healthy one. She told me to take the rest of the day off and not to worry about any fallout at work. Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Proud of myself, not for any achievement or accomplishment, but just for standing firm in my boundaries, for not giving in to manipulation, for choosing my own well-being over someone else's comfort. Kyle sent a text 3 months later. It was barely an apology, just a vague, I'm sorry things went the way they did. Maybe we can talk sometime. I could see the manipulation in it. The door left open for future asks. I didn't respond. I just blocked the new number Head texted from. Sarah and I got engaged 6 months after the confrontation with Diana. We'd been together 3 years by then, and she'd seen me at my absolute worst during this whole situation, and hadn't flinched. Shed stood beside me, practical and strong, never trying to fix me but always supporting me in fixing myself. When I proposed, she cried and said yes before I even finished asking. Marcus was at our engagement dinner. Sarah's parents were there too, warm and kind people who treated me like I'd always been part of their family. Sitting at that table, laughing at Sarah's dad's terrible jokes, watching Marcus and Sarah's mother discover they both loved old mystery novels, I understood what family was supposed to feel like. It was supposed to feel safe. It was supposed to be people who celebrated your joy instead of resenting it, who supported your growth instead of sabotaging it, who showed up because they wanted to, not because they wanted something. Diana sent a card to our engagement with no return address. Inside, Shed, written in her perfect handwriting that she hoped I was happy, and that someday I'd realize what I'd given up by excluding her from my life. She said she forgave me for my cruelty and would always love me despite how I'd treated her. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, positioning herself as the bigger person while still twisting the knife. I threw the card away without rereading it. Sarah asked if I was okay. I told her I really was. Diana's words didn't hook into me the way they used to. I'd learned to recognize manipulation when I saw it, and I'd learned that recognizing it robbed it of power. A year after the confrontation, Sarah and I bought a house. It was a small 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood with a yard for the dog we were planning to adopt. We spent weekends painting walls and fixing little things, building our home together. Marcus came over one Saturday to help me install new light fixtures. We worked side by side, him teaching me about electrical work, me trying not to electrocute either of us. And it felt natural in a way I never thought it could. While we were working, Marcus told me something He'd been thinking about. He said He'd wasted so many years, feeling guilty about leaving, stuck in the past, unable to move forward. But therapy had taught him that guilt without action is just self-indulgence. What mattered wasn't how bad he felt about the past, but what he did with the present. He said he was grateful I'd given him a chance to be in my life now, even if he couldn't fix the years He'd missed. That night, unpacking boxes in my new home office, I found an old photo. ID kept buried in a box for years. It was from a school award ceremony when I was 11. I'd won a math competition, placed first in the whole district. In the photo, on stage holding my trophy, grinning at the camera. The auditorium behind me is full of parents and families. Diana hadn't come. Shed had something else to do that day, something involving Kyle that she said was more important. I'd won the biggest academic achievement of my young life and celebrated it alone. I looked at that photo for a long time. I thought about throwing it away, erasing that painful reminder. But then I decided to keep it, not as a wound I picked at, but as a reminder of something important. That kid in the photo had won despite having nobody there to cheer for him. Had succeeded with no support, no encouragement, no belief from the people who should have given it freely. He was strong in a way he didn't even realize yet. I framed the photo and put it on my bookshelf, a reminder of where I came from and how far I'd come. That evening, Sarah and I sat on our new back porch watching the sunset. Marcus was grilling hamburgers even though Head insisted he was terrible at it. Sarah's parents had stopped by with a housewarming gift. The air smelled like summer and charcoal and fresh-cut grass. Sarah leaned against me and asked if I was happy. I thought about the question seriously. I thought about my childhood, about Diana's abuse and Marcus' absence and Kyle's cruelty. I thought about the years I'd spent believing I was fundamentally unlovable, damaged beyond repair, destined for isolation. I thought about Diana's final curse, her prediction that I'd die alone, and then I looked around at the people in my backyard. At Marcus, carefully flipping burgers with intense concentration. At Sarah's mother, laughing at something Sarah's dad said. At Sarah beside me, solid and real and choosing to build a life with me. At the home we'd just bought together, the future we were planning, the family we were creating. I told Sarah I was happy, really, genuinely happy. Not because everything was perfect, or because id healed completely from my childhood, but because id finally learned that I had a choice. I could choose who I let into my life. I could choose who I called family. I could choose to walk away from toxicity even when that toxicity wore the face of a mother. Id learned that blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse, that real family is built on respect and love, not DNA and manipulation, that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation and self-respect, that the people who truly love you celebrate your success instead of trying to profit from it, that you cannot change people who don't want to change, and destroying yourself trying is pointless. Id learned that healing from family trauma takes time, maybe a lifetime, but it's possible, that your worth isn't determined by your parents' opinion of you, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who hurt you, even if those people raised you. Most importantly, Id learned that the family you choose can be more real, more loving, more supportive than the family you're born into, that you can build something better than what you came from, that you're not doomed to repeat patterns or fulfill curses or become the person someone else decided you'd be. Sarah squeezed my hand. Marcus called out that food was ready. Sarah's parents started setting the table we'd bought at a yard sale last weekend, and I sat there on my porch in my house with my chosen family and felt something had been chasing my whole life. Peace. Not because Diana had changed or apologized, not because Kyle had learned or grown, not because my childhood had been rewritten or my pain erased, but because I'd finally given myself permission to build a life without their toxicity in it. I'd given myself permission to be happy despite them, not because of them. Diana was wrong about me. I wasn't cold or selfish or doomed to isolation. I was capable of building real relationships with people who valued me. I was capable of love and trust and vulnerability. I was capable of breaking the cycles I'd grown up in and creating something better. That realization, sitting there on my porch surrounded by people who actually cared about me, was worth more than any amount of money Diana could have asked for. It was worth more than any apology she could have given. It was worth everything. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who didn't respect you? How did you find the strength to stand firm when people tried to guilt you into giving in? Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about real-life challenges and how people overcome them. And share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, even when family makes you feel selfish for doing so. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear at times, but I hope it helped you feel less alone if you're going through something similar. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect by everyone in your life, including your family. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. Take care of yourself out there, and I'll see you in the next story.